We're back, my friends, and of course a big headline earlier this week is that the city of Aurora fired police chief Vanessa Wilson. She actually took over the department back in 2020, was really tasked with reforming it, and of course the wake of Elijah McClain's death. In her time, she fired an officer who passed out drunk in his car while on duty, a union leader who ridiculed diversity efforts, and officers who joked about McClain's death. Now, in a statement, Wilson said she was proud of the progress the department made in the face of so many different challenges ahead of her. And to talk a little bit more about the potential legal ramifications of that firing is our 9 News legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Whitney, thank you so much for being with us this morning. There's a lot to dive into about this. We're going to try to get through them as quickly as possible. I think first we got to talk about what Chief Wilson, or former Chief Wilson now, potentially could do. Now, to be clear, she has not said what her next steps will be, but my question is, does she have a claim for wrongful termination here?
It's a good question, and it's a question a lot of people have been asking, and it's interesting because she actually had a contract, and so this is a little bit complex because she's a public employee. And so I just saw the statement, the termination letter today, that said from Jim Twomley, the city manager, and basically it was very short, and it said basically there's morale issues and they're not happy with that, and they said she doesn't have an appeal right, and so they're terminating her. So now her attorney sent out a notice that said she was terminated without cause, that this was political pressure from the newly elected conservative board that put pressure on the city attorney to do so. So whether the chief pursues something, we'll see, but she definitely has attorneys, and so there may be a claim in the future.
Now, this is also really interesting because we're not just talking about any kind of termination. This is a termination of a very public employee. Right. So whenever you're following a case like this, does someone like Vanessa Wilson have additional rights? Right,
that's a great question, and it's really good for I think the viewers and the public to understand these differences. So as a private employee, if you don't have a contract or certain things in the employee handbook, they could fire you because you're at will. So they could fire you without cause, without notice. Now, on the other hand, a public employee, because the courts are saying you're a public employee, you actually have a property right. So under the Constitution, they can't take life, liberty, or property without due process. And the courts say a public employee has a property right in their job. So she may have some constitutional protections.
Whitney, you know, there are so many different layers to this case, and of course, one of them being not just the fact that this firing happened this week, but also that Aurora Police Department continues to be the subject of some intense scrutiny at all different levels, including the Attorney General's office right now. With all these different investigations happening right now, what might this termination mean for those?
Well, that is a great question and a great point. It's a nuanced issue because the consent decree was essentially because the Attorney General did a 14-month investigation, and they found that the Aurora Police used excessive force, that it was more directed towards people of color. For example, I think in Aurora, there's about 15% population of African Americans, and almost 50% of the excessive force claims or the physical force were on those individuals. So one of the issues was that so many people were excited about Chief Wilson in terms of her efforts to really work with the community and mend some of those bridges. That's sort of the rub, though, because internally folks are saying, well, there was a low morale and she was more out-facing. So in the midst of Aurora being still under this consent decree, which means that there's somebody sort of monitoring Aurora to make sure that they're moving forward in the way that they should. So some folks are saying, look, she was progressive, she was working with the community, this is a setback. Other folks are saying we need somebody who's going to improve the morale. So as it relates to the consent decree, it's probably not a violation, but because she was so, I guess, forward-looking in a way, some folks are saying this is a real setback.
All right. I mean, a lot like we were talking about to really dive into when we're talking about all this. Of course, we don't have the time to do so this morning, but thank you for giving us that great start. We very much appreciate it.
Oh, it's always good to be here and to see you in person.
Yeah, great to see you in person, too. It's been a very long time. High five, my friend. All right, we're going to keep the broadcast moving.